Welcome to the very first episode of the Podcast Digest, a series in which we break down the most insightful conversations in the world of podcasts. In today's episode, we're delving into a 3-hour goldmine of a conversation between Chris Williamson, host of the Modern Wisdom podcast, and Tim Ferriss, a best-selling author, entrepreneur, and influential figure in the world of productivity and lifestyle optimization. From the best productivity tips and tricks all the way to how our goals influence our psychology, this podcast had it all. So in this video, I'm going to be walking through the key themes and takeaways I got from this conversation, so make sure you stay tuned. Throughout the entirety of this podcast, both Chris and Tim were discussing ways in which we could pursue our goals, many of which were somewhat contradictory to the methods we see today. In this podcast, they spoke about a crucial part of our goal pursuit, and it's something that I think a lot of us overlook, and that is setting the goal in the first place. They argued that having a long-term vision and a dream of what we want to achieve is all well and good for our motivation, but it doesn't really get us that far.
It's very easy to hide behind the big. This is borrowed from Seth Godin. In other words, you can say, I want to change the world. Okay, great. But then on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, what does that mean you're actually doing? What is your next physical action for that?
Tim said to get over this, he often focuses his energy and his time on short-term projects, the stepping stones to reach where we want to get to. He also specified that he focuses on short-term projects that allow him the most opportunity for growth and learning.
There are a few common threads. The primary one is asking the question, and I'm not the first person to do this, but how can I succeed even if I fail? Or can I succeed even if I fail? If I ask myself, which of these will help me to develop or deepen skills, develop or deepen relationships the most, even if they fail by external metrics, I bias towards choosing that project.
Although a project may not achieve what it had intended to do, if we come away having learned something about ourselves or the world, then it will never be a failure. Granted, he's likely taking on different projects than you and I, but where we are on this success continuum, growth is something we should definitely be focused on. And a lot of people in their goal pursuit have recently taken to having daily to-do lists. However, Tim argued in this podcast that having a weekly schedule is way more efficient and productive than having a daily one.
I find that weekly architecture for me is scaffolding that is a little more helpful than having very tight parameters on a daily basis, because you're going to have unexpected events.
Spontaneous events with friends, extra work popping up, or even feeling ill or tired, all of these can act as barriers to achieving our daily tasks. However, if we focus more on what we want to achieve over a week, it not only holds us accountable, but also allows us that bit of flexibility for when life gets in the way. Daily to-do lists can also lead someone to focus too much on being productive, as opposed to the original goal they had set out to achieve. This is something I'm going to be making a video about very soon, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. If you're anything like me, you're always looking for new ways to tackle low moods, whether it be meditation, also a video coming out about that soon, or journaling. There is plenty of advice out there of what to do when you're feeling down in the dumps. But in this episode, Tim gave me something very important to think about, and that is prevention is always better than a cure.
What are the things that you do to pull yourself out of a funk, or how would you advise people to better deal with depression and anxiety or low mood?
I really think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure with this. So I try to prophylactically have routines in place that seem to decrease the likelihood.
If we schedule in things that often prevent us from getting in those low moods, like spending time with friends or exercising, we're way less likely to succumb to those feelings. The idea of scheduling in preventative measures was really interesting to me. As someone who's somewhat disorganized and reactive, I'm often adjusting to the state that I find myself in. For example, the issue that I'm currently facing is that I am super motivated, and I do fortunately have the time to do the things that I want to do. However, this often leads me to working until the point of exhaustion, to burning out. I'll find myself working throughout the day without taking many breaks and really pushing myself to the limits, only to find the following day that I have to redo a lot of what I'd just done, because the quality just got worse as time went on.
In a permissionless environment where you can really embrace the freedom of being able to work whenever you want, wherever you want, for most people, what that is going to turn into is working all the time, wherever you are, and you don't have someone to stop you other than yourself. It's much more problematic than you might expect. How do you avoid burnout?
For me, it's all scheduling. Like, don't rely on discipline. Rely on systems and scheduling.
Scheduling both times to work, but also our downtime is really important for our productivity, but also our sanity. So hopefully now I can be a lot more mindful of when I should be working and when really I just need to stop for the day and relax a bit. I've always believed something we can all take away from listening to these podcasts is hearing this person's road to their success. And specifically in this podcast, both Chris and Tim reflected upon the most impressive people in their lives and their paths to get to where they are.
The high performers are usually buckets of neuroses, just like everybody else, with some really serious insecurities that maybe they're aware of, maybe they're not, who have figured out how to capitalize on one or two strengths.
They noted that most successful people have taken one or two things they're good at and hyper-focused on leveraging those to get to where they are. A perfect example of this is elite athletes, because they've taken this one specific sport that they're good at and almost stripped everything else away in that pursuit. For me, this was a really interesting point because a lot of people talk about balance. However, if we want to be great at one thing, then that would also mean everything else needs to be great, and that's just not realistic.
Accept that all of your heroes are full of shit. Your heroes aren't gods. They're just regular people who got good at one thing by sacrificing literally everything else. Looking at high performers, they're not ubiquitous human-wide examples of perfect people. They're usually very competent in one narrow domain.
And I've heard a lot of successful people talk about this idea of sacrifice, and I think that's something we do all need to consider. And finally, after all this talk about pursuing your goals and maximizing productivity, they spoke about one thing that really stuck out to me.
Last and not least, I would say, if you're serious all the time, you're going to burn out before you get the truly serious stuff done. So don't take every day like it's a life or death thing.
Contrary to what people like David Goggins or Alex Hormozi preach, chasing a goal should be fun. One of the main reasons a lot of people give up in their goal pursuit isn't because they're a weak person or they have no discipline. It's just because they're not really enjoying the journey. Life isn't all about optimizing and achieving. It's also enjoying what you have and appreciating how far you've come. And that's something I think we can all benefit from. This podcast was full of not only thought-provoking approaches to productivity and general life advice, but also included some very specific tools to increase your productivity. I did include them in this video, so be sure to check it out if you like. And one final point that really struck me was that we should all be growing to try and become the future parents of our children. Just something to think about. Anyway, let me know what you think about this becoming a potential series, because I really enjoyed it and benefited from it, and hopefully you did as well. And aside from that, have a lovely day. Bye-bye.